All right, so Mike Kafka's getting a second interview tomorrow. He's the first person in the Texans process that's going to get a second interview. What does it mean for DeMeco Ryans? Who's next? And could there be some mystery candidates lurking around? It is The Locker Room on YouTube, number one source for Texans daily digital content. I'm Landry Locker. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610 and on the Odyssey app. A lot of reaction on the internet to the Mike Kafka news. If you're a DeMeco Ryans guy or a Jonathan Gannon guy or a Shane Steichen guy, don't worry about it, because Mike Kafka of the final six, and we're assuming that Sean Payton's out of the mix, Kafka, Evero, and Brown are the only ones who would be able to do their second interviews this week. You can't interview DeMeco, Gannon, or Steichen until next Monday at the earliest. And I'm assuming at least 2 out of 3 of those guys, maybe all 3, will get second interviews. The person on the losing team is probably going to go first, and then they're going to schedule accordingly with the week between the Super Bowl for the winner of the NFC Championship game. So it doesn't mean anything about DeMeco Ryans. It doesn't mean they like Mike Kafka more. It just means that because his team has been eliminated, he is able to have his second interview this week instead of having to wait till next at the earliest. So don't freak out about that. One thing I will say about Mike Kafka, though, and I've been saying this since the very beginning, is number one, I think he's worth speaking to. I think he's a very, very solid candidate. I think that Mike Kafka, you've heard stuff about him in Kansas City. He's kind of had Eric Bieniemy in front of him. But I've never heard anyone say anything bad about Mike Kafka. Now, Patrick Mahomes is obviously, he's coordinator proof. And no matter when Andy Reid retires, Patrick Mahomes is probably still going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the game. But Mike Kafka in Kansas City, there was talk that it was a no-brainer that if Bieniemy got a job, that Mike Kafka was immediately going to be elevated. And in his 1 year away, you saw why people liked Mike Kafka, because he was the overseer of the offense. And Mike Kafka was the guy who Brian Dable immediately trusted to call plays. And it's not like one of these, mystery type of things. It was common knowledge right off the top that Mike Kafka was going to take over for the Giants. Brian Dable was going to let him call plays, and that was going to be the situation. I'll just show you with a simple internet search. Mike Kafka will call offensive plays versus Titans. That's September 5th. That's first game of the year. Mike Kafka gets play calling tryout in OTAs. Offensive coordinator Mike Kafka to call plays. That's ESPN.com. That's Yahoo, etc. December 6th, Brian Dable won't take over play calling. Mike Kafka embraces special opportunity. So he was calling plays for the New York Giants. Now, how did that look? Here are some stats as to how the New York Giants improved with Mike Kafka calling plays. In 2021, they had the second worst offense in the NFL when it came to yards. They had 287 total yards. To put that in perspective, that's 9 more than the Texans had. And we know how bad that offense was. This past season, they improved by 46.9 yards. They came up to near the middle of the pack. They were 18th in the NFL in total yards. The passing, they actually went down in passing, although their ranking went up. They went from 188 to 185.7. But Daniel Jones' completion percentage went from 64 to 67. He went from 10 touchdowns, 7 interceptions to 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. And his QB rating went from 84.8 to 92.5. And his QBR went from 47.5 to 60.8. And in large part, the reason why the passing yards weren't higher is because they ran the ball. And they had Saquon Barkley healthy for most of the season. So that probably had a lot to do with that. They went from being the 9th worst rushing team in the NFL with 99 yards rushing to the 4th best at 148.2. And their points per game, they were middle of the pack. They went from second worst at 15.2 points per game to middle of the pack at 21.5. So Kafka did a really good job in his 1 year away from Andy Reid calling plays. Now, I think there's a chance that Nick Caserio is really going to like Mike Kafka. I've said from the beginning, because Brian Daboll is so familiar with the Patriot way, he even uses the term tough, smart, dependable and stuff like that. The fact that he trusts Mike Kafka, and if you listen to Mike Kafka's kind of got that Patriot vibe, which I know will make a lot of people roll their eyes. I think there's a chance that Nick Caserio really likes what he's about. And I think Mike Kafka is going to have a chance to win over Nick Caserio. So what is that second interview going to look like? I'm assuming that when this happens, what's going to happen is Nick Caserio is going to sit down with Mike Kafka. They're going to do the general, like, get to know and stuff like that. And I think this is where you get to the nitty gritty. This is when you start intensely discussing what your staff would look like. They're probably going to watch maybe a little bit of tape, put him on the board. Mike Kafka, I'm assuming if he's preparing for the interview like you're supposed to, he's probably watching Texans tape right now. And he's going to go in there and say, I like Dameon Pierce. I think if we add a second running back, we can run the ball the way we did with the Giants. Why the hell was it Brandon Cooks in motion more? Why were you on that using this guy in the slot? This Nico Collins guy can do this, the tight ends, blah, 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 the offensive line. Like he's going to dissect the Texans offense and tell them what he thinks about it. That's how a good second interview is going to go. And that's how I anticipate, based on what you hear about Mike Kafka, it's going to go. It's going to be a diagnosis of the offense. And the good thing about these second interviews and why you don't want to make too much of them, on top of the fact that Kafka's the only one who can go early, is they can be resources even if you don't end up hiring the guy. Like if Mike Kafka tells you some stuff that, maybe slip the mind of Pep Hamilton or slip the mind of Tim Kelly, then that's a good thing for the front office to hear, whether it's Nick Caserio, et cetera. But I anticipate Mike Kafka is going to have some thoughts on the offensive scheme. He's going to go over it, and I think Nick Caserio is going to like him. And I think he's going to like a lot of these candidates. So from there, after Kafka gets his second interview, we're probably going to find out in the next couple of days whether or not Evero and Brown are going to get their second interviews. And then we're going to find out after the NFC Championship game who's going to get their second interview. And I assume the losing team, like let's say the Eagles lose, we'll hear that Jonathan Gannon and or Shane Steichen is going to get their interview first. And then DeMeco Ryans is going to be somewhere down the line, maybe later in the week, maybe even closer to the Super Bowl, maybe after the Super Bowl, and vice versa. If the 49ers lose, I anticipate that a week from now, maybe a week from the Kafka second interview, we'll hear from DeMeco Ryans. But I would bet very heavily that DeMeco Ryans is going to get a second interview. So I wouldn't read too much into it. It's really just about logistics. It's about timing, and it's flat out about rules. If they wanted to interview DeMeco Ryans today, they wouldn't be allowed to. They have to wait till Monday because those are the rules. So that's where we're at. Mike Kafka, intriguing candidate. Very good in his 1 year away from Kansas City. Kansas City liked him. Brian Daboll liked him enough to just give him the keys to the offense, and the Giants went from 4 wins to 10. A lot of it had to do with Saquon Barkley, but that's where we're at. The one thing I will say is if we're looking at the other guys that we believe are the 3 prime candidates, Gannon, Steichen, and DeMeco, the question comes up, and it's fair because this is where you kind of try to figure out, the potential flaws of each candidate. Well, what about the talent that these guys have? These guys have stacked units. The Eagles got some dogs on defense. The 49ers got some dogs on defense. Look at that Eagles offense. That offensive line's the best in the league. Look at those receivers. Look at that running back. Look at Jalen Hurts. That's fair. But the one thing Kafka has on the other guys, and again, you balance it out, you figure it out. Sometimes it's, the great coaches have the great players. The great coaches make the players better, et cetera. But from Mike Kafka's perspective, he took on Daniel Jones, who we didn't even know would be the starting quarterback all season for the Giants. They made the playoffs, and that definitely deserves some attention because they have one of the worst receiving cores in the NFL. They were the second worst offense in the NFL last year, and they got up to like middle of the pack, and they made a playoff run. So that is the one advantage that Mike Kafka does have is you don't have that. Well, is he doing this because of the Jimmies and Joes and more so than the X's and O's? Don't know. But Mike Kafka gets first dibs at the second interview, and the process continues. A lot to talk about. We'll keep it going in the locker room throughout the week. Subscribe, like if you're a Texans fan. I'm here for you. I know it's been a tough time. If you're not, it's a great resource to keep up with the Texans. Hopefully, eventually, there's more relevance. But if you do need the Texans stuff right here, locker room, like, subscribe. Fun process. It's getting exciting. Going to be on the air today, 10 to 2 on In the Loop. Go ahead and download that Odyssey app, join in, and no matter who the Texans hire, whether it's Kafka, whether it's Steichen, whether it's Gannon, whether it's DeMeco, we're all in this together. Have a good one.